Hello, everyone. Welcome to Data Umbrella's webinar. I'm going to do a brief introduction and then open up the talk to Cecilia. And if you have any questions, you can ask in the chat along the way, and we will have them answered whenever is a good time. This is being recorded and will be placed on our YouTube within a couple of days. About Data Umbrella, if you're unfamiliar, we're a community for underrepresented persons in data science, and we organize data science events for the community, and we are a nonprofit organization. This is our team that makes it happen behind the scenes. I'm Reshma Sheikh. Beryl Kanali is out of Kenya. Christina Mulas Lopez is also in New York, and Sangam is out of Swadik, is out of India. We have a code of conduct, and we thank you for helping to make this a friendly, welcoming community that people want to keep returning to. Various ways to support Data Umbrella. First and foremost is to follow our code of conduct. We would love it if you could share our events with other people that you think might be interested. And we have some open source projects online, such as video timestamps, and website is all open source, as well as some open source projects. I'm going to skip over this because we're in the midst of transitioning our fiscal host. We have a YouTube channel. We have a really extensive library of talks on data science, Python, RStats, open source, job search. One of them is career advice. And these are other playlists such as Data Science for Beginners, contributing to Scikit-learn and PyMC as well. We have a newsletter. It's at dataumbrella.substack.com, and we have a newsletter that goes out the first of the month. It's a pretty low traffic, so if you're interested in some updates about the open source and tech community, sign up. I'll share the link in the chat. These are our most widely used social media links if you want to use the QR code. We use Big Marker, this platform right here, and at the top right, you'll see CC for closed captioning. So if you would like live transcript and it helps you, feel free to click on that. We also have an online suggestion box. So if you have any suggestions for future event topics, if you have any feedback on this event, if you have any technical issues that you'd like to let us know about, if you'd like to do a talk for Data Umbrella, let us know. Our next event is in 2 weeks from now, which is Build Your First Database Web App with Open Source Tiki Trackers, which is going to be very, very fascinating. And today's talk is Navigating Ethical Data Science, GDPR, EU AI Act, and Responsible Practice. Cecilia is a data and analytics practitioner, academic, international speaker, and published author focused on the intersection of technology, data, and trust. She has worked for several Fortune 500 companies and taught and lectured at Columbia Business School, MIT Sloan, and University of Pennsylvania Wharton Business School. Cecilia earned her bachelor's in marketing and international business from NYU Stern School of Business, where she also minored in psychology and East Asian studies. She also earned her master's in statistics from Columbia University and is currently pursuing her doctoral studies focus on interpersonal relationships within immersive digital environments and its impact on trust. She's expected to complete her doctoral degree late 2024. Cecilia is also the author of Authentic Interactions, a weekly newsletter where she posts her disciplinary musings related to trust. You can find Cecilia Jones on LinkedIn. And with that, I will be handing over the mic and screen share to Cecilia.
Well, thank you so much to everyone who's joining us. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm excited for this discussion today. This is not an engineering talk, but I think it's a very critical type of conversation for us to have as practitioners, as users, as consumers of all of these technologies. So thank you for taking the time to invest in yourself and learn a little bit more about this topic. As mentioned, what we will be discussing today is ethical data science. We'll talk a little bit about GDPR, the EU AI Act, and responsible practices. So this talk is ideal for you if you touch any of these areas. So on the left-hand side, as a data leader, are you in charge of a function within an organization where you have you're needing to deal with strategy and culture? You have to deal with ethical ecosystem. Are you trying to navigate regulations as it is continuously changing? As a data practitioner, a builder, do you have to also address implementation and advocacy? Are you concerned around data quality and inclusivity in your practice? As well as you may be in an organization that is learning into all of these practices. And so is there a knowledge gap to bridge? And therefore, hopefully you'll be able to take something away from the discussion today. I am very much interested in everything that is happening for you as well as your own experience. So always, please, 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 I love the interactivity. Please put it into the chat. Please put it into the Q&A. Also, feel free to let me know I'm not up to date, or maybe your own experience is slightly different from mine. Please, 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 your contributions are so much appreciated. So what you will take from this conversation today, on the left-hand side, we'll talk about regulatory updates. Guess what? There's always something new. We'll talk about GDPR, EU AI Act, and current US legislation. We'll touch a little tiny bit on Colorado because that's the latest. We'll also talk about best practices. So the good news is this topic is not so completely new, that there isn't infrastructure, there isn't best practices, there isn't frameworks. We'll go through a few frameworks to help you kind of navigate the space depending on the maturity of your practice as well as the maturity of your organization. And then this is one of those fields where everything is continuously changing. Anything related to technology typically is. So how do you keep yourselves up to date? How do you continuously learn in the space? And if you want to be an expert in the space, how can you improve upon those areas as well? So we'll talk a little bit about other organizations that I personally follow and participate in, as well as thought leaders, just to give you additional perspectives other than my own. So the agenda, we'll go through a little bit of introductions. So why listen to me? Why am I talking about data ethics and responsible AI? We'll go a little bit into the why. I tend to think a lot in macro, meso, and micro. So the big picture, the middle picture, and the individual. And so this is a critical point in time in the sense that those of us who are practitioners in the space, what we are doing, what we are building, what we are creating has an outsized impact. And so that with that responsibility, how do we address the choices we make in our day-to-day? We'll go into a little bit of the what. So I promised we'll talk about regulation. So we're going to talk about policy and regulation. I'm going to sneak a little bit of philosophy in there. As mentioned in my introduction, I like to blend a little bit of the qualitative and quantitative together. I love blending in the hard sciences with the social sciences. And so I think it's all of those things together that makes all topics so much more interesting. We'll talk about how, so frameworks. So as mentioned, we are not alone. There are definite frameworks that are in place in practice. And so you should be familiar with these as practitioners, as well as thought leaders in the space. In addition to me, that I think could be a good lens to think through some of these challenges. And then we'll end with Q&A. So with that, first, a little bit about you. I'll be very honest. I'm testing out this polling feature. So we'll go with question number 1. Question 1 says, I've already made a mistake. It's okay. How confident are you in navigating the AI ethics space? So 1 is not confident, 2 somewhat confident, 3 more or less confident, 4 confident, and then 5 very, very confident. Okay, so we have 1 person. Okay. We're in the middle of the pack. We're creating our own Gaussian curve, our own bell curve. Excellent. Somewhat confident, more or less confident. Okay. I love the humility. I love the curiosity. I'm so grateful for everyone's honesty around that. Okay, so we have 14 responses. We have somewhat of a Gaussian curve, so I'm excited about that. So we have everyone across the spectrum, more or less in the middle. And to be very honest, that is the space today. There are so many moving pieces to be up to date, to be on the latest and greatest. It's continuous education. So me too. I'm more or less confident. I'm learning new things every day. So thank you for sharing all of that. I'm going to close the poll now. The second question is, and this one is where it can potentially get spicy. I'm curious. So please feel free to put it into the chat. Who should be responsible for AI ethics? So one would be the government, two would be the firm, and then three would be the individual. So I'm not opening a poll. If you just want to quickly put it in the chat, do you have an opinion on this? Or is there a secret answer number four that I'm not thinking about? Hello, Alice. Welcome. So who should be responsible for AI ethics? And spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you right now, there are no wrong answers. Ah, Carissa, I love that. For all of the above. That's a good answer. Preferably all. Okay. Starts with three. Okay. Starts with the self, all stakeholders. Yes, I love that. All right. Public should have it. Yes, Emma, I agree with you. The public, the users, the end consumers should definitely have a say. Yes. Ooh, there's a distinction between responsible and accountable. Someone's familiar with RACES. Love it. All should have their own roles. What I love about all play a role, excellent. What I love about all these answers is that it's not that straightforward. It's complex. Depending on the definition, it could be one or many or all. And those nuances and that complexity is the reason why ethics is so difficult in many ways and why philosophy is so difficult in many ways. And those of us who are in practice in the data and AI space, we get the double whammy. We're extra lucky that not only does building the technology can be complicated as well, and be on the bleeding edge of our knowledge as a collective. The philosophical, the ethical, the moral components of it can also be complicated. So thank you so much for sharing into the chat. And then also finally, a little bit about you. Hopefully we can address it as well. What are you seeking from this talk? So as alluded to, we have people who are not very confident about the space, people who are very confident about the space, a whole bunch of people in the middle, different roles, leaders, builders. What are you looking for this talk? Oh, yes. Love that, Diana. As always, the devil's in the details. Yeah, very, very true. So what are you seeking from this talk? Please feel free to put it into the chat. I'll do my very best to provide as many answers as I have. And I'll be honest with you, I'm probably going to have questions just like you. So learning the possible ways to protect the public. Okay, excellent. I love that answer. So having the public in mind is always something that's important. More awareness of ethics, since I definitely find it important. Okay. The first thing I will say, I say this to my students, I say this to my clients, I say this to anyone I mentor as well. Compassion for the self is first. We're so busy. All of us are so busy. So for us to be able to dive deep into every single important topic to us, I have not yet broken the rules of physics and found more than 24 hours in the day. So compassion first as we're all trying to figure out the space. Hear another perspective. Excellent. Another practitioner, teacher, academic. I love that. Um, Hopefully we can learn from each other. Thank you. Curious about the AI community, various groups, towards networking. Okay, some are very technical. Okay. So what I love about this organization in specific is that there are so many ways to engage in technology, engage in AI. So to have technical talks, engineering type talks, excellent. Career professional development talks, excellent. Some of these social science type talks, which this one is today, also excellent. They're all part of your toolkit as a data and AI practitioner. So we're very fortunate to have these kinds of forums. So thank you so much for everyone for sharing into the chat. I see I have a very tall order, and hopefully we'll all gain something from the conversation today. I have one additional ask. I have a lot of resources embedded into this presentation. And so for internet points, internet brownie points, how many resources are mentioned in the presentation? I will ask the question again at the end of the presentation. There are a lot. All right. And with that, a little bit about me. So why me? This is a short introduction. My name is Cecilia Donez. Most people who work with me call me Ceci or Cece. I go by both. There's a story behind that, but that's for later. On the left-hand side, as mentioned in my introduction, I have worked for Fortune 500 companies for them within their four walls. I'm also an academic, meaning I do lecture and I do teach courses. These are some of my affiliations, things that I think a lot about and teach about and talk about. Data ethics is definitely one of them. Marketing analytics is another one of them. I also talk a little bit about algorithmic methods and also professional development and leadership. So all those areas. On the right-hand side, so these are professors that I actually follow because I'm very much interested in the work. So I believe data ethics really sits at the intersection of computer sciences, philosophy, and law. And so I love the fact that this topic is interdisciplinary because it's always at those liminal spaces, those intersection spaces where not only you get the fun questions that are difficult and challenging, but you also get the opportunity for creativity and new ideas. And so this is why I tend to think about things in the intersection. So Professor Bengio, and apologies in advance for mispronouncing all sorts of names today. I'm doing my best, but as some can tell, I do have a North American accent. So forgive me for that. So why do I like Professor Bengio's work out of the Montreal Institute for Learning and Algorithms? He's an advocate for responsible and AI ethical development. And he's very much focused on bringing in philosophers, sociologists, and historians as translators to integrate these different disciplines and avoid misunderstandings when we're trying to do interdisciplinary projects related to AI. And so understanding that people have different ways of communicating, people have different ways of relating. I find that the advocacy towards interdisciplinary and understanding you need individuals who can translate between different communication styles is so critical. So I'm very fond of his work. Professor Floridi out of the Digital Ethics Center in Yale also advocates for interdisciplinary approach, covering governance, ethical, legal, and social implications. So again, another area where technology touches many parts of our lives. And so I'm very fond of his work. And then also Professor Hartzog out of Northeastern University, where I appreciate his point of view is that while we do have regulations, and so we'll go into it a little bit later, around like privacy, so GDPR and CCPA and those types of regulations, this professor specifically is interested in the concepts of notice and consent, which for those of us who are maybe practicing in the marketing and advertising space is common constructs that we talk about. And this professor is critical of these things, meaning we are not doing enough when it comes to the regulatory environment when we're thinking about consent. And therefore, we have opportunity to improve. So yes, there's something there today, but we can improve upon the regulation. We can improve upon the policy. And so these are 3 professors. I follow way more than that. But these are the interdisciplinary areas that I would recommend if this is of an interest to you, and you want to dive deeper, you want to learn more. These are all good areas to look into deeper. So we've gone through the introduction. So why me? Why I think about this a lot. Let's go a little bit into the why. And as I mentioned, I tend to think in macro, meso, micro. So we'll go into 3 different examples. So why? Our industry has an impact on people's lives. So this is an excerpt from a study from ProPublica, who is a nonprofit independent newsroom dedicated to producing investigative journalism in the public interest. And so this is a particular study that was done in 2016 when they were looking at criminal sentencing. And so the big idea was, gosh, in the criminal justice system, we're starting to use technologies, machine learning, AI to help us not only manage the volume of cases, but also can we be better at making sure that individuals who do commit crimes, we're getting them the appropriate support? Are we making sure that our laws are being followed? And can we minimize risks of repeated crimes again? And so from a place of goodness or a place of trying to be helpful, leveraging technologies. And what this study had done, they looked at over 7,000 people who were arrested in Florida from the period of 2013 to 2014, and was looking at the fairness of the algorithm that was used. And what you see on the top half is that it would provide a risk score for that specific defendant. And for Black defendants, the risk scores is what you see on the top. For white defendants, the risk scores is what you see at the bottom. And without knowing too many details, the 2 pictures look different. And so what was at the time very innovative for the study was highlighting the fact that this algorithm that was being used relatively broadly was starting to demonstrate bias. And in this case, bias against Black defendants in the sense that it was incorrectly flagging them as higher risk for committing future crimes as compared to white defendants. And in fact, the accuracy was relatively low, meaning only 20% of the time did the algorithm actually predict recidivism. And additionally, we'll talk a little bit about it also in terms of framework, the defendants had no way to verify or challenge the risk scores assigned to them. So there was a lack of transparency. And so for the concern, and continues to be the concern with anyone who's utilizing AI algorithms to augment decision-making or to help decision-making, is that there was concerns that judges may put more weight against the scores due to cognitive biases like automation bias. So if the machine is utilizing all of this data, and obviously very intelligent individuals have helped put it together and there's some rigor behind it, they may put more weight against these scores as opposed to other forms of evidence. And so this has direct impact on people's lives in the sense that we have systems like the criminal justice system where if there is a bias in an algorithm that's being utilized and it's not identified and it's not mitigated, this can create ripple effects in terms of how it impacts not only the individual families, but communities and more broadly the social contract. And so this is a relatively older study from 2016. However, it is a cited case study quite often because it's very clear that the algorithm was biased. And it was through this investigative journalism that we were able to better understand, bias in algorithms matter. It can affect systems that are meant to help the people. So the next example is from the Baker Institute. Rice University has the Baker Institute for Public Policy, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank. The purpose is really to focus on foreign and domestic policy issues, offer analysis to form policymaking, and convene discourse amongst leaders and train future policy researchers. So it is meant to be a neutral think tank that's very much focused on, well, what do these technologies and how do they affect people's lives? So this is an excerpt from a 2020 study trying to understand better how AI, how machine learning has impact on jobs. And so those of us who've gone to university and those of us who haven't gone to university, at the end of the day, we have to find a way of maintaining our quality of life, and therefore we have to get employment some way, somehow. And so they were very much interested in understanding, well, one of the key benefits of AI and AI technologies is automation. It's a low-hanging fruit in many organizations, highly repetitive tasks, tasks that have high levels of constraints that are repeated, and they can definitely be automated. And what the study had found, so maybe more contemporary conversations around, oh gosh, AI is going to take our jobs. Probably not. It's going to transform our jobs, most likely, yes. What this study had found was that there were two main effects, meaning there was increased inequality and there was impacts on economic growth. And where I get very interested in this specific study is that one of the concerns we can have as a part of technology and as it continues to develop is, are we creating or accelerating or amplifying the dichotomy between individuals who may have access to resources versus individuals who may not? And for those individuals who may not, how do they obtain the skills and how do they update their skills such that they're still very viable members who can be employed? And therefore, there's all sorts of conversations which are quite current, especially in the higher ed space around, well, what are the skills of the future, knowing that AI will augment many jobs or automate many jobs? What do we think about how do we teach critical thinking? How do we teach, how do we embed more of the scientific method in those kinds of higher level critical thinking skills? Or how do we build intuition? In many industries, most of the senior leaders built intuition over time. Well, that's through experience. So if AI helps to automate or accelerate, how do people learn? How do people build that kind of intuition and experience that typically is part of the success skill set for leadership type roles? And so here, the main point again is very much focused on automation will not kill jobs, but what can we do in terms of its potential to increase inequality? So that's at the firm level. And then at the individual level, so this also is a relatively older TED Talk, but Eli Pariser is an author and online activist, and he was very much focused on filter bubbles. And so filter bubbles is where we only consume media that's related to things we already believe in, already what the algorithm says, hey, you're leaning one way, I'll show you more of what you like, so you can get that dopamine hit. And so the ideas, the diversity ideas, decrease as a result of these filter bubbles. He's also known for co-founding Upworthy, so focused on progressive perspectives with viral content, and founded Data and Society Research Institute. And so as an individual, he's taken a good amount of effort and resources to try to make sure that technology serves the public good, the greater good. And so in this talk, and I highly do recommend if you have opportunity to watch it, he talks a lot about filter bubbles, again, the narrowing of ideas, and how that could be potentially harmful for society, meaning you don't run into other individuals that have differing points of view. And to add to that, not only do you not run into individuals that have different points of view, you don't really have opportunities to practice, well, what do you do when you disagree? How do you disagree with respect and dignity? How do you have a civil conversation, even though you may strongly disagree with the person who has a different point of view than you? And so this talk, I highly recommend, if you're able to watch it, talks about these potential risks and societal harms and how to address, for your own media diet, how do you address, if you are experiencing a filter bubble, how do you get yourself out of it? And so that's at the individual level. So we talked a little bit about the macro with the criminal justice system. We talked about the Meso, so about individual firms and jobs. And then we talk about the micro, the individual person who is trying to make a difference. So what can you do as an individual in practice? So your impact in 3 key areas. So the first one is around foundational AI ethics. So good news, congratulations, by participating in the conversation today, by committing to listening through this talk. Check, you're already taking a step forward in terms of making sure that you have the appropriate foundational AI ethics top ideas within your toolkit. And so again, it's very much focused on broader principles, guiding principles when you're thinking about deploying, building, and utilizing AI. So we will talk more about learning frameworks. We'll talk about ethical concerns. And the idea is that you need to start from somewhere. So let's start with some foundations. And so I would argue the first column is you're addressing some of that today. So congrats. The second column is related to bias in AI. So for those of us who are builders and those of us who are decision makers on whether or not our organizations are going to use a specific technology, a specific AI technology, this is a little bit more difficult in transparency because not only do you have to identify that there is a bias potentially in a system or AI algorithm. 2, you need to figure out, well, given that this bias, what are the potential harms? And are these harms something we can mitigate against? Or is this something that, according to our organizational morals and ethics, we're not comfortable with? And so this is where it gets a little bit more tricky. It's a 2-parter. And so the idea, again, is identifying mitigating biases within AI systems. So not only do you have to find it, but once you do find it, what are you doing to mitigate any potential risks? And on the third column, explainable AI, and this is really more for individuals who are actually hands-on keyboard building AI systems. And I would argue this is also extremely difficult in the sense that part of one of the challenges, and in the first case study with the criminal justice system, the issue was there was lack of transparency. We could not explain and we could not see as a particular defendant, why did I get a particular score? And why did I get a particular score and why can't I change the score? And so explainable AI is so important when we're thinking about building trust in our AI systems and building trust in each other. So some of my academic work is focused, as I mentioned, on trust and interpersonal relationships and how technology, which intermediates those interpersonal relationships, have impact on trust. And so when we use systems to communicate with each other, when we use systems to interact with each other, being able to explain those systems is so critical in part of that trust equation. And so here are 3 ways to think about how you individually can make an impact in the responsible AI and ethics space. So check regarding foundational AI ethics. We'll talk a little bit more about bias and explainable AI, and I'll, again, provide you resources so that way, depending on the context, depending on the maturity, depending on your specific needs, you can pull together parts of the toolkit that's most relevant for you. So we discussed a little bit about who I am, why I'm interested in this. We discussed a little bit about the why. So thinking about it not only from the societal, the firm, and at the individual level, we talked about how you can actually take action in these areas, whether or not you're a decision maker on whether or not your organization is going to utilize AI, a specific algorithm, or if you're a builder building AI systems. So let's get a little bit deeper into the nitty gritty of, okay, we have an alphabet soup of current regulations. What does this all mean? So I will be focusing much more on the EU versus US aspects. There are regulations, there are alternatives in other markets, but these are the two largest ones today. So a little bit of background without going into the history of law and why things came to be. I am definitely not a lawyer. Why I find this perspective to be helpful. For those of us who are in practice and wondering, why are certain conversations moving so quickly? And why are certain conversations frustratingly slow? How do I keep track of all these moving pieces? The philosophy of the law and how it has been built may be helpful to understand why certain markets are moving in certain speeds. So on the left-hand side, we have civil law, which is the fundamental philosophy for the EU. So think about it as top-down regulation. And so we decide on the rules, there's a legislative body, we need to codify. And that's the EU, which is from a top-down perspective, when you are going that way, it makes it a little bit easier to move a little bit faster. You have to be a bit more prescriptive. However, this is why the EU is moving a little bit faster. On the right-hand side, we have a different philosophy. So the US is very much focused on common law. So we're always looking for precedents. We're looking for decisions from judges. So another way to think about it, it's very bottoms up. And what you'll see in the subsequent slides is that you will see that the states are making individual choices to try to protect its citizens, which is a good thing, but it is a very much bottoms up. We do not have in the US at this point in time a national law that mirrors the EU AI Act, and therefore, as a result of that, we're still navigating that highly complex space. So I present these philosophies not to provide a law course, but to give you context. So as things continue to evolve, you have a better understanding of why certain systems are moving at certain paces and focusing on certain areas. So I teach this to my students as well. Privacy, data privacy. This is the beginning for many of us trying to touch and figure out what's this regulatory environment. So we think first about data security and data privacy. And so what I tell my students, there is a distinction between privacy versus confidentiality. So privacy is related to the people's rights, individual rights regarding their information. I'm going to be a little bit US-centric at the moment. In the US, we have laws like this already in existence. So for example, HIPAA, when it comes to healthcare law, and how healthcare, especially healthcare personal information, is addressed. These are already pre-existing laws and regulations in place. So it's about their rights, so people and their rights. So that's what privacy is about. However, when you think about end users, when you think about the consumer experience, when you think about the individual or the layperson or the average person, what they're really thinking about is confidentiality. And confidentiality has to do with, you may already have my information. I may have provided that in some exchange of services. So now you have it. Now that you have it, you as the practitioner, you as the firm, you as the organization that is building algorithms that potentially can help many people, how are you going to deal with my data? How are you going to make sure that the data that I've given you, more or less explicitly, implicitly, how's that being protected? How's that being transformed? If I give you this in confidence for a very specific reason, can you keep it a secret? And so something to think about, for especially for those of us who are designing algorithms and thinking about training data and where do I get this training data? Privacy, okay, that's one thing. Yes, it's a little bit easier to think about rights, and yes, we should all have universal rights around our data. But once that data is out there, at the firm level, at the industry level, how are we ensuring that a secret is kept a secret? And that is definitely a challenge. And from a consumer's perspective, an individual user's perspective, we tend to think more in confidentiality than we do with privacy. So you already have my data. I can't do anything about it. Pandora's box is open. But now that you do have my data, I need you to keep it confidential. I need you to keep a secret a secret. And so these are two different things. And the reason why I mention that is sometimes when we enter the conversation around responsible AI and AI ethics, some folks, some individuals will say, okay, we're already regulatory compliant, we're already privacy compliant, we're doing a good job there. And I would argue that, yes, being regulatory compliant, that's great. That's wonderful. But is that the social contract you have with your customers? Is that the social contract you have with your consumers? Is that their expectation? No, their expectation is I've given you my data. I need you to keep it private, or I need you to keep it confidential in addition to private. So with that, we're going to go into a little bit of detail. The good news is this is a resource I highly, highly recommend because it does get complicated and it's in a beautiful table. It is a many, many page report if you're very much interested in understanding all of the details. So this is just meant to be a very high level, superficial 30,000 foot view of a comparison of different privacy regulations. So really the essentials. So on the far left-hand side, you see GDPR, so the General Data Protection Regulation, and then you see the U.S. response in the 4 columns to the right, which is state by state. And the reason why I highlight a few differences is that if you are working for a multinational organization, or if you have the ambition to work for a multinational organization, and you are working with your chief privacy officer, or you're working with your CISO, your chief information security officer, or you are speaking to your legal counterparts, trying to make sure that you're compliant across all these different regulations can be quite difficult. It is complex. And there are nuanced differences due to definitions within those laws. And again, some of it is because we're looking at civil law, which is EU, versus common law, which is US. The philosophies are slightly different, but also even within the US, California, Virginia, Colorado, their interpretations of components of what it means to be an individual or what it means to be de-identified. Those are all slight nuances. For the purposes of today, I'm trying to give you a high-level overview so you can have as many resources at your fingertips as possible. So we won't be going through all the details, but again, I am going to highlight a few of the differences. For example, a natural person is different from an individual. And so depending if you're looking Colorado's Privacy Act as opposed to CCPA, which is California's, there is a distinction between natural versus individual. A bigger difference, GDPR is opt-in as opposed to the US laws by state, which is opt-out, a humongous difference when you're thinking about consent and notification. If you are a developer, I bring up this one very text-heavy slide for only one reason. So California, different from everyone else, looks at the consumer or household. And the reason why I highlight that is, especially when you're building models that are doing any kind of prediction, are you predicting at the individual's level, or are you predicting I have experience with fast-moving consumer goods, so FMCG. Are you predicting potential consumption patterns at the household level? So there is a nuance that California does pay attention to that some of the other regulations have different interpretations. So this is all to say, you do not need to be a super expert on all the nitty-gritty details. However, making sure that you're familiar with some of these resources available to you, making sure that you are connected, especially if you're building things, to the parts of your organization where legal and compliance sits, such that you're being transparent about what you're doing. You're making sure you're within compliance and you are respecting all of the nuances when it comes to these different regulations is so critical. So the EU AI Act, why do I really appreciate this? Just as a high-level overview, it was proposed by the European Commission in 2021. There are components of it that are rolling when it comes to adoption. So 2024 through 2026 is really where components of it start to turn on, which is great in the sense that it has given runway for many organizations to be compliant. It has given runway for the actual specifics of the regulation to be refined based on that technology. You can already get a sense of where I'm leaning towards with this. Because there is a runway, it also means as technology continues to race faster and faster and there are new developments, some of these regulations will always be chasing what is the latest and greatest in terms of the technology. However, we have to start somewhere. However, we have to begin from a place of principles, begin from a place of guidance. And so this is an excellent beginning, but definitely not the end of how we as collective cultures choose to regulate this type of technology. And the basic idea behind it is we're just trying to ensure ethical development, deployment, and use of AI systems with a focus on safety, fairness, and transparency, again, for the public good, for the greater good, and to improve upon individual lives. Why in specific I really like some of the aspects of the EU AI Act. There are different risk levels of AI. And so at the time when they were posing this, this was relatively new. Now there are other frameworks that also have similar risk levels, which is great because it is not one size fits all. And so from that perspective, understanding the level of risk, depending on the types of algorithms, types of predictions that you're trying to create, deploy, use, will determine how much regulation, how much scrutiny, how much additional safeguards that you need to put in place if you're going to utilize these tools more broadly. And so at the very top, what you'll see is unacceptable risk. And so this is unacceptable from an EU's perspective when it comes to safety, fundamental rights, as well as EU values. And so social scoring by governments is included in this, exploitation of vulnerable groups, and manipulative and deceptive AI is included in this group as well. So there's unacceptable risk, no tolerance. The next layer, so the orange area of the pyramid, is high risk. So these cover areas where there are applications like critical infrastructure, education, employment, essential services, law enforcement, and systems where can be a good service for the people, for the public, but also can pose risks to health, safety, or fundamental rights. And so again, there needs to be additional guardrails and safeguards in these areas. And so for those of us who are already playing or have played or continue to play with the technologies such as generative AI, this is an open question. So I don't have a crystal ball. I cannot predict the future. However, given the definition as it stands today of high-risk AI systems, generative AI does fall into this bucket. And so what further regulation, what further guardrails to ensure that we minimize harm, especially against marginalized or vulnerable populations is so key. And so I highlight that. The next risk level is yellow in this visual, and it's limited risk. So you can imagine chatbots, sometimes deep fakes, and people can have opinions about whether or not that's limited risk or high risk. But the important thing about this layer is really about making sure we are transparent with the end user. We are transparent with these consumers so they can make a choice whether or not to further engage with that algorithm, with that AI. And then at the very bottom, the green is minimal or no risk. So those of us who have ever used email, we're using AI. For whatever reason, this tends to surprise some folks. But yes, and these are relatively lower risk situations where we already have AI or machine learning in place to help us sift through all the different digital signals in our day-to-day lives. And so email is a very good example of that. And very recently, Colorado has actually come out with a version similar to the EU AI Act. It's so new that I don't have a slide on it, but I am more than happy to tell you concerning consumer protections in interactions with artificial intelligence systems. So Colorado is leading the way for the US when it comes to legislation that is meant to put regulations around AI. And very similar to the EU AI Act, it's very much focused on mitigating any potential harms, especially harms related to high-risk AI systems. And there is definitely inspiration taken from the current regulation out of the EU. And so from that perspective, Colorado is really trying to address areas like AI being utilized for education, employment, healthcare, housing, insurance, legal services, many of the topics as discussed before. And so that's a high-level overview of the current regulations. It is not a law class, so I did not go through all of the details. However, there are resources available to you, and the good news is there are many organizations that are focused on making sure that the entire ecosystem is aware of these regulations and also compliant as they continue to change. So a little bit about philosophy. So the person on the right, this is John Rawls. He died a few years ago at this point, but he was an American philosopher who was very much focused and interested in the idea of justice. And so he was very much trying to think about, well, what is a just society? And so for him, a just society was one where fair social contracts were designed in ignorance of your own advantages and disadvantages. And the big idea from his work that he's most famous for is the veil of ignorance. So if you had to construct rules and laws, if you had to construct a society, how would you define fair? So removing as best as you can the ideas of who you are, what race you come from, what socioeconomic class you would come from, how do you create the rules such that it is most fair? And the two principles behind this is that everyone has basic liberties as long as you're not limiting others, and that the advantages of these societies should help the worse off the most. And so again, some focus on individuals that are vulnerable or individuals who are marginalized. The reason why I bring up this philosophy of justice here is that as more AI regulations come into place, as codes of conduct come into place, as individuals, firms, and organizations make choices around what are they going to do about responsible AI, this is a very simple, well-established framework that despite all of the changes, if we think about, what is fair? How can I make things as fair as possible? How do I make sure that it's not limiting others? How do I make sure that if there are vulnerable or marginalized communities, that I'm not creating intentional or unintentional harms to them? These are guiding principles. And so these are strong foundations when you want to think about what is your responsible AI practice? What is your organization's moral codes, ethical codes surrounding AI? And with that, we'll talk a little bit about the how. So frameworks, I realize this is also an alphabet soup of acronyms. So the first one is related to the IEEE, so the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. Why I like this, it's a professional organization, it is global, and they have been around for a very long time, since 1963. Why did I take an excerpt from their executive summary? So an assumption, a heuristic, a bias one could have about an organization that's full of engineers focused on electronics and technologies could be, well, we're quite quantitative in nature. We're very much focused on the rules. Well, in their executive summary, not only are they talking about eudaimonia, which is related to constructed within philosophy, which closely relates to the English word flourish, they're talking about ethical practices across different cultures. And I'll only highlight the last sentence. You can read it later or more broadly, the entire document if you want. Measuring and honoring the potential of holistic economic prosperity should become more important than pursuing one-dimensional goals like productivity increase or GDP growth. So I highlight this because this is the tension all of us are living through, those of us in practice. There is the tension of what we want to do morally, ethically, regardless of the belief system or ethics system that you may participate in, versus some of the commercial goals that maybe our organizations have. And because of this tension, it's not a bad thing as long as we're aware of it, but it is something that gives us opportunity to be mindful about the choices we make, mindful about the conversations we engage in, and mindful about the topics we create advocacy internally around our organizations. So I mentioned that they also have a dearth of resources because they have been around for a very long time related to responsible and ethical AI. Feel free to look into those resources and see what could be applicable for your organization. And they're quite active in communication within the space, so you can also keep up to date with them. The next one is US-centric. So the National Institute of Standards and Technology, it's a non-regulatory federal agency within the US Department of Commerce. Why do I like this? They started from a place of cybersecurity, so very much interested about privacy, very much interested about security. Why I like this is that this framework that you see here around how are we keeping data safe, secure, resilient, explainable, interpretable, privacy enhanced, fair without harmful bias, accountable, transparent, valid, and reliable. These are all fairly common constructs you'll see in many models related to AI risk management. And what I like about NIST in specific is they do have a risk management framework, and that risk management framework it has crosswalks to other management frameworks. So when we think about, oh, well, which framework do I use? Oh, which standard do I use? Understanding how the Venn diagram of what frameworks overlap, don't overlap, where there are definite connections, where there are synergies between different frameworks could be important for your organization to better understand. And so NIST has done a lot of proactive work in this area such that you can see the different connections to other frameworks. So I like the work they did there. The next one is related to the Open Data Institute. It's a nonprofit based out of the UK in London that is very much focused around open, trustworthy, and a data ecosystem. So understanding that many organizations will utilize open data sources, open models, open weight models to build their AI capabilities. How can we do this in the most ethical way? And what I really like is that not everyone's at the same place of the journey. So everyone's at a different point of maturity. Everyone is still growing in their capabilities. And so what I like about what ODI had done is then they recognize that different capabilities are at different maturities, organizations are also at different maturities. And so how do we create a rubric of reference around that? And they have an open source workbook, which again, for your organization, as you're navigating what your moral ethic guidelines will be, this is an excellent resource in terms of figuring out where are we today and where do we want to be as an organization. And as an individual, if you're assessing what's your next opportunity, what are the kinds of technologies you want to build to help people, this is a great way also of trying to place yourself in the ecosystem, place yourself in that maturity curve. The last one, I'm also a big fan of this, the IAPP, so the International Association of Privacy Professionals. This is also a global organization that has been around for a good amount of time, since 2000, very much focused on privacy. The reason why I like them is that their purpose is really to define, support, and improve upon the skill sets of individuals and organizations in this space. And so they have a wealth of resources, not only for certification, to signal that your organization is serious about these issues and therefore you're getting the certification. As an individual who's trying to always keep up to date with the marketplace, these are certifications that indicate that you do have a very strong foundational understanding of certain concepts related to security and privacy, and therefore it can give you a different perspective, a different advantage in comparison to other candidates. And in specific, when it comes to the EU AI Act, the IAPP also recognizes that it's very complex, moving and very moving quickly and dynamic. And so they're quite proactive when it comes to pushing resources that are already available to help organizations with toolkits, assessments, et cetera, to upskill themselves and make sure that as these rules come online in 2024 through 2026 and onward, that you are compliant, that you have the appropriate capabilities within your organization to be to do the right thing when it comes to responsible AI. And so I just quickly went through a whole bunch of resources. So bringing it back. So what were the three areas again? When I said, okay, you as an individual, you can make impact, you can change the way things happen when it comes to responsible AI. Foundational AI ethics, as mentioned, check mark. By participating in this discussion, listening to this discussion, you're setting the foundations for your own understanding of foundational AI ethics, and therefore that's a good thing. We talked about the IEEE as one framework and therefore an additional resource when it comes to foundational AI ethics. I do list additional resources that we don't have time to go over today, but if you are interested in learning more, the EU ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI, I recommend looking into. The Montreal Declaration for a Responsible Development of Artificial Intelligence, I also recommend looking into. Again, to give yourself multiple perspectives, but a strong foundation of AI ethics. When it comes to bias in AI, we went over NIST, we went over the IAPP. Additional resources, the AI Now Institute, a fan of their work, also nonprofit, and the Data and Society Research Institute, very much focused on culture, society, and bias. And again, as practitioners, as developers, as decision makers utilizing AI, how can we be choiceful and mindful of which AI, what AI, and how we use it for the service of people? And then when it comes to explainable AI, we talked a little bit about ODI, the Open Data Institute, and I also have additional resources. So these are a little bit more technical because this is really meant for developers. However, even if you're not hands-on keyboard developing, if you're a decision maker, an influencer for a decision maker, understanding these additional resources could be helpful when you need to evaluate, should we go forward with this partner? Should we continue working with this partner? Do we help this part of the ecosystem by making sure that we're being clear, that we are aware that we want the AI systems we utilize to be explainable, and therefore responsible and ethical? So again, there's so much you can do as an individual that, yes, you can participate in larger societal organizations and systems of that nature. You can also participate at your firm level, but at the individual level, you can also do that as well. So how you can stay up to date. Here are institutes I follow, and also volunteer. The Alan Turing Institute, this is out of the UK. It's the UK's National Institute for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence. They're very much interested in research related to data science, AI, training future leaders in the field, and also engaging the public regarding conversations on these technologies. They do have an open Git. I do highly recommend if you are interested in learning more, but also contributing. So they're very open to contributions, even if you're not an academic, which I appreciate. For those of us based in the US, the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence. This is another area where they're focused on research, education, and policy to benefit humanity. I highly recommend their work as well. They do a lot in terms of public education. And so participating in their webinars, reading the articles that are very accessible to the public is a way of keeping up to date. This is another one, the Montreal AI Ethics Institute. It's an international nonprofit focused on democratizing AI ethics literacy and equipping citizens to take action on AI ethics issues. I'm a humongous fan of their newsletter. In transparency, it's kind of long, but it's because they're so up to date and they're so fortunate to have so many resources available for individuals who want to lean into the space. And the community is also very active. So highly, highly recommend. And the last one is All Tech is Human. This is a nonprofit organization focused on strengthening the responsible technology ecosystem and co-creating a better tech future. I love this one too because not only are they utilizing the rigor that we get from academia, they're trying to make it very, very relevant for the public, relevant for end users. And so they're very much focused on making sure that there's engagement from not only civil society, industry, government, and academia. And so I find them quite accessible. These are 4 large organizations, all doing good work, varying different flavors. So I highly recommend staying up to date with them. These are books I like to read a lot. The first one is relatively it's been around for a little bit of a while. So this one's by Kathy O'Neill, Weapons of Math Destruction. She was inspired by the financial challenges, the global financial challenges of 2008, felt very strongly that she needed to write a book regarding the potential biases as a result of utilizing AI systems and making sure that this is part of the public discourse. So she's an American mathematician, an academic, also worked in large organizations as well. The book on the right, maybe this one's a little bit less well known, Rebooting AI. So Professor Marcus is a scientist, author, and entrepreneur, professor of psychology and neuroscience at NYU. And then Professor Davis is a professor of computer science at the Courant Institute of Mathematical Science at NYU as well. The reason why I put this book up as a recommendation is that there's a lot of buzz around AGI, artificial general intelligence. Oh, we're going to have sentience. Oh, we're going to have all sorts of other bigger challenges regarding what it means to be human, because our AI systems will become super intelligent in many ways. And what these authors are arguing is that at this point in time, our AI systems lack robust general intelligence, common sense reasoning, and the ability to understand the open-ended nature of the real world. And so for today, for now, let's focus on now, What do we put in place such that as technology develops, no one has a crystal ball, we have the guardrails in place. And so let's be realistic and pragmatic about where AI technologies are today, while also being mindful of we do need to put in guardrails. And so I thought this was a very balanced perspective, a very pragmatic perspective around AI. So removing the hype, what's the real, and making sure that we're very much focused on what can we do today, so that way we, as things evolve and develop, we have plans for tomorrow. And I'm not done. More resources. Here's a primer on algorithmic accountability. I also add additional resources regarding jobs, because the economy or job situation, that's definitely top of mind for some markets. There are codes of conduct that are already in place. So the Data Science Association has a code of conduct. If you're interested in reading that, you may choose to adopt a version of it for your organization. So again, we don't need to reinvent wheels. There are good frameworks in place. It's just you need to adapt it to your current construct, your current situation. Again, aligning AI systems around ideas of justice. And so if you want to better understand the foundations of where a lot of the AI, responsible AI and ethics comes from, that's a good paper. As I mentioned, some of these organizations are very open to having contributors. And so the IEEE, if you want to participate in building standards as a practitioner, if you want to lean in, feel free to lean in. So that's a link to help you navigate that space. And then, as I mentioned earlier, NIST is one framework, but it's connecting to other frameworks that are already, regulatory frameworks already in place. And so they're very good at making sure that there's interoperability across the different regulatory frameworks. So if you need to adopt something, I highly recommend looking at their specific crosswalks. All right, and with that, so we went through a lot. I spoke a lot. I went the distance. We'll have a moment for reflection. So the very first question, I don't have a pull-in queue. No worries. So for yourself, many of us decided that we were somewhat in the middle with 2s and 3s on our confidence. Oh, thank you for pulling it up. So after this presentation, how confident are you in navigating the AI ethics space? So A, are you not confident, somewhat confident, more or less confident, 4 very confident, or 5, 4 confident, or 5 very, very confident? So I'm very, very curious. So I will admit as well that there's a lot out there. So am I confident in my ability to know which framework to use at which time? I want to think about that more. Am I personally confident and actually very pleased and frankly just comforted that there's so much work being done in the space as an individual consumer, as a practitioner, and there's so many resources, so I don't have to do this alone. I'm actually quite excited about that. All right, we're getting we're getting a skew in our normal bell curve, so that's good news. We're moving somewhat away from not confident. We're getting more folks that are a little bit more or less confident, and very confident. So thank you so much for participating. I know this was a longer session, and so your commitment to stick with it, very much appreciated. And those of us who are interested, based on the conversation today, based on all of these slides, feel free to put it into the chat. It's the same question: who should be responsible for AI ethics? Is it government? Is it regulatory bodies, firms? Is it the self? Everyone. Yes, it is everyone. So I hope one of the main messages from the conversation today is while it may feel like a very UN, yes, 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 yes. Ethics for beginner, basic resources. Okay. For basic resources, I would definitely, I would say the Montreal AI Ethics Institute is really good with basic resources, but you'll quickly connect to other resources as well. No need, I hear you. No time to get a philosophy degree, but I will say, as an individual who's participating in this social experiment that we call life, how we choose to want to treat each other, how we choose to utilize the tools we have at our disposal to help each other. That's why I did mention John Rawls. So making sure that there's fairness as we define fairness, mitigating bias, making sure that the populations that may be vulnerable or marginalized, we're doing our best to avoid any harms unintended. Okay, so thank you so much for sharing. And then this is the last question is really for you as an individual. You've invested the time to listen to this talk. You've invested the time to participate. These were not easy topics, and it was a lot of topics really quickly at a high level view. What are you individually taking away from this talk? What matters to you from this talk? Where are you going to ask more questions? Where are you going to dive deeper? And so that's really meant for you to reflect upon your own experience here today. And with that, we'll go into Q&A. So thank you so much. That's my contact information. If you're interested in reaching out to me, I'm more than happy to do collaborations. I'm also more than happy to do debates. I love debates as well, to help extend my own knowledge and understanding of the space. And I'm also very much open to figuring out new ways of communicating these really complex ideas. So that way more people can be part of the conversation. All right. It looks like we have some questions.
Yeah, Cecilia, thank you so much for this presentation. I'll read the question from, I don't think I'm pronouncing this person's name, Saroni, correctly, but I'm a master's student and this session has helped a lot in building a baseline of my understanding on data ethics and where to look for resources and frameworks. I am also interested in participating in research on AI and data ethics. Can you suggest anything on where and how to start from?
Okay, there are so many. Okay, I did mention it before. So really fond of the work that's happening out of the Stanford HAI Institute. The reason why I say that is, again, they're very much focused on doing academic work, but also being very accessible to the public. Their professor, it's an interdisciplinary group of professors, so you're not getting only professors that are out of computer science. You get business, you get philosophy, law, et cetera, and all of them are quite active in their research. And so that's a great place if you're interested in seeing where you can contribute. So I also mentioned, I'm looking up the name at the moment. I also mentioned another resource. And this one's a little bit focused on the US. However, All Tech is Human is based out of the US. It is a nonprofit. They do focus on research as well. So if you want to participate in research that isn't necessarily tied to an academic institution, but is tied to a nonprofit very much focused on the public sphere, highly recommend leaning into those spaces. I would say the Montreal AI Ethics Institute, they don't always have active research, but again, because it is a nonprofit and they're just trying to move the conversation forward, if you're interested in helping to write pieces, helping to better make the work more accessible to as many people as possible, that's a great place to also go. So the resources that I did recommend on the how you can stay up to date slide, which will be posted, these are all great places to lean into if you're interested in starting your journey. And there are many, many more I did not mention, not only because of my own ignorance, because I don't have a complete view, but also because there's just so many, which is great. So many people are very passionate about these topics and trying to make a difference. So thank you. Thank you for asking the question, and also thank you for trying to lean in. That's all we can do. All we can do is our best to try to lean in into this conversation. So thank you.
And we have one more question from Diana, which is, you mentioned that IEEE initiative refers to Eudemian ethics, but guidelines, codes of conduct, and regulations are closer to deontological or consequentialist arguments. Governments, firms, and individuals may see ethics of AI from different perspectives.
Ooh, Diana. Okay. I heart that question extra. Why do I heart that question extra? Your background in philosophy and understanding those nuances, so critical. And you're actually, and you said it better than me, you're actually pointing to the tension that we have in the sense that government is different. Regulatory bodies and government has a different philosophy than individual firms in a capitalistic commercial society, different from individual perspectives. And it is exactly that tension of how do we protect the individual? How do we continue to drive growth given a capitalistic society? And how do we address the greater good all at once? And it's exactly those tensions that makes this topic so hard. You have differing points of view, differing incentives, differing motivations. And that's what makes this conversation so complex. So one, thank you for highlighting that, and you've articulated it way better than I did, bringing in additional philosophical perspectives and constructs. But two, you're actually hitting the nail on the head. This is complex because we are coming from different points of view, and that's okay. I think part of the challenge with some of the current discourse on many topics is that there, for whatever reason, we believe there must be one way. No, there can be many ways. It's just how do we communicate and get to resolutions through maintaining dignity, maintaining respect, maintaining civil discourse. And so I love that you mentioned that there is this conflict, there is this tension. And what I'm arguing in the individual choices we make as practitioners is where do we participate in these conversations? Where do we choose to participate in these conversations? And how do we do it with dignity and respect for different points of view? So thank you. And you're absolutely right.
And with that, we've ended our Q&A. Cecilia, thank you so much for this amazing presentation. We really, really appreciate you taking the time, and we'll be in touch.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.